So we're here with Sammy and Shelby, and I just got the New York Times today, and they had a few articles that I wanted to read. So of course, these are difficult times for everyone, but what was really interesting for me is just like, wow, this is a weird headline. So there was the case of a German officer who pretended to be a refugee, and he was like planning to blame refugees for something. That was weird enough. And then there was an article where is it? People are moving to Mexico to avoid corona in the US. That's weird. And then we have stir crazy Americans flee south. Well, which is not really good for Mexico. And then we have something that's always interesting. So, how does the world view Israel? 12% of Israelis are already vaccinated. Rate is fastest in the world and has given a lift to the country's embattled leader. That's a nice way of calling him. To be quite honest, I had an appointment today and they ran out of vaccination, so I'm like, I don't know. And there's a lot of skepticism about whether it works. So it says more than 12% of Israeli population received a first dose of coronavirus vaccine, a rate that has far outstripped the rest of the world and buoyed the battered domestic image of the country's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel's campaign, which began December 20th, had distributed the vaccine to more than 3 times as much of its population as the second fastest nation, the tiny Persian Gulf kingdom of Bahrain, according to figures complied mostly from local government sources by our World in Data. I didn't get that. By contrast, a little more than 1% of the population of the United States and only small fractions of the population in many European countries received a vaccine dose by the end of 2020, according to our World in Data. Though China, the United States, and Britain have each distributed more doses overall. To be honest, I don't know if that's a good thing because we're not sure the vaccination actually works. We're not sure of the side effects. It says Israel's heavily digitized community-based health system. All citizens by law must register with one of the country's 4 health maintenance organizations. Yeah, we do have a good health system. Population of 9 million, Israel's relatively small size has played a role as well. An aggressive procurement effort helped set the stage. The health minister, Yuli Edelstein, said in an interview last week that Israel has entered into negotiation with drug makers as an early bird, and that the companies were interested in supplying Israel because of its HMOs, Health Ministry reputation for efficiency in gathering reliable data. We are leading the world's race thanks to our early preparation, he said. Well, if the vaccination doesn't work, we're kind of leading it to the wrong direction. Internal political conflicts, confusing instructions, and lack of public trust in the government left Israel seemingly fractured in October. While restrictions imposed in the fall reduced the number of new coronavirus cases in recent weeks, it has been seeing them rise to more than 5,000 a day. sending the country back into a third. Sorry, I'm really tired. A third, if partial lockdown. Nearly 440,000 Israelis have been infected and more than 3,400 have died. Israel's officials have not published the exact number of vaccine doses that it has received, how much it paid for them. Actually, it did. I heard it's like $800 million or something. But if it turns out Israel overpaid compared to other countries, Mr. Edelstein said the cost will still be worth it, even to reopen the Israeli economy 1 week earlier than it otherwise could have done. Israel having prioritized health workers and citizens 60 and older, Mr. Edelstein said that the majority of its high-risk population should receive the second of 2 doses by late January. Well, I had vaccination appointment even though I'm not over 60, just because I registered and they ran out. So Netanyahu has secured millions of doses from Pfizer along with Moderna and other companies. Oh, yeah. So Israel prioritized health workers. That we said. We brought millions of vaccines here, more than any other country in the world relative to its population, Mr. Netanyahu said, adding, we brought them to everyone, Jews and Arabs, religious and secular. Come and be vaccinated, he urged in Arabic. Arab representatives say they have been battling a flood of disinformation about the vaccine in the Arabic news and social media. Dr. Samir Sabai, the mayor of al-Fahim, where Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Edelstein visited Friday, said told Israeli television he had sent a voice message to 25,000 phones in the area urging people to get vaccinated, describing the fight against the virus as holy for everyone. Israel's ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which has been hit particularly hard by the pandemic, was also seen as a population that might resist vaccinations, but those initial fears appear to have dissipated. Rabbi Itzkovich Silberstein, ultra-Orthodox authority in Jewish law, issued a public ruling after consulting with Professor Belicher, saying that any dangers posed by the vaccines were negligible compared with the dangers of the virus. Several important figures in the community were photographed getting the vaccine. So far, the government's inoculation campaign has not extended to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, who have not had access to any vaccinations yet. The Palestinian Authority does not appear to have publicly requested them. Legal experts and human rights activists said Israel was obligated to provide the Palestinians with vaccines. The United Nations Humanitarian Affairs Agency for the occupied territories said last week that the Palestinians, how are they occupied if the Palestinian Authority are ruling there? That the Palestinian Authority had applied for financial support from the global vaccine sharing system COVAX and was working with international organizations in the logistics. Mr. Edelstein said that the government's first obligation was to its own citizens, but that it was in Israel's interest to help suppress the infections among the Palestinians. If God willing, there will be a situation where we can say we're in a position to help others. No doubt it will be done. Yeah, they only work and build homes here and work in building sites, but they can't get vaccination. I think that's really, really weird and not nice. At the headquarters of one of the HMOs in Jerusalem last week. The atmosphere was calm and orderly. Constant stream of people was seated in small booths and injected within a minute or two of their arrival. Facilities have been accommodating towards young Israelis who have shown up with older relatives and sometimes called in the general public to come rather than throw away leftover trays of thawed vaccine that can't be stored the next day. Oh well. What was really difficult for me to read was on page 9. So there's a really sad story. A woman who's 87 years old. She was hidden in Poland during the war, so she lost a lot of her child. Says COVID-19 is stealing my final years. So she said she was hiding in a bunker during World War II. She said, I'm a miracle child. Most of the Jews of Chodorov never returned. When the coronavirus came, I thought, I'm a miracle. I will make it. I have to make it. During the war, we didn't know if we would make a day. I didn't have any freedom. I couldn't speak loudly. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't cry. But now I can feel freedom. I stay by the window and look out. The first thing I do in the morning is look out and see the world. I'm alive. I have food. I go out. I go for walks. I do some shopping and I remember no one wants to kill me. So still I read. I cook a little bit. I shop a little bit. I learn the computer. I do puzzles. I still sometimes feel that I'm missing out. A full year is gone. I lost my childhood, never had my teenage years, and now, in my old age, this is shortening my life by a year. I don't have that many years left. The way we have lived this year means I've lost many opportunities to lecture, to tell more people my story, and to let them see me and how the Holocaust happened to a real person who stands in front of them today. It's important. I am scared that I'm not going to be in the shape I was a year ago. When this started in March, one of my grandchildren who lived in New Jersey went to Maine with his wife. They never came back. They have a baby boy now, and I have only seen him on Zoom. This child will never know me. That's a loss. Some of what I'm missing is so simple. I have a male friend I know from synagogue. We would take a trip, if we could, by car to any place. I would go to Florida, maybe even go to Israel for a couple of weeks, but not now. So again, this has shortened my life. This is my biggest complaint. I understand that fear people have, and I understand you have to take care. But there is no comparison of anxiety of the coronavirus to the terror I felt when I was a child. There was a fear with no boundary. This is going to end, and I'm already thinking, planning where I'm going to go first, what I will do first when this all ends. Toby Levy, retired accountant and volunteer docent for the Museum of Jewish Heritage. I don't want to make a mean joke, but I think if you're a retired accountant, you already lost a lot of years working in a really boring job. So, what are you complaining about exactly? It's not like accountant. Oh my God, to be an accountant. Oh my God, tear my nails out. And then I saw a really horrifying article in the New York Times. This is horrible. Starving children. Where is it? So, okay, the Holocaust was over, and she's reminding everybody of the Holocaust. But listen to this article. Starving children don't cry. This is a father kissing his son just before he died. I mean, I'm just horrified. This article it was just horrible. Starvation is agonizing and degrading. You lose control of your bowels, your skin peels off, your hair falls out, you hallucinate, and you may go blind from the lack of vitamin A. While you waste away, your body cannibalizes itself. It consumes its own muscles, even the heart. Yet Abdul Saeed, a 4-year-old boy, so emaciated he weighed just 14 pounds, wasn't crying when he was brought to a hospital recently in Aden, Amman. That's because Children who are starving don't cry or even frown. Instead, they are eerily calm. They appear apathetic, often expressionless. A body that is starving doesn't waste energy on tears. Sorry, I'm sorry. It directs every calorie to keep the major organs functioning. Abdu died soon after arriving at the hospital. A photographer named Giles Clark, a friend of mine, whom I met on my last trip to Yemen, was there. That's what Nicholas Christoph says. My last trip to Yemen was there again and captured the scene. His photographs, including those with this column, are painful to witness. Many families, including Abdu's, want photography to be circulated because they hope the world will understand children are dying needlessly of hunger, that help is desperately needed to avert more child deaths. The world had pretty much licked famine until 2020. The last famine declared by the United Nations authorities was in a small part of South Sudan for a few months in 2017, but now the UN warns that famine is looming in Yemen, South Sudan, Burkina Faso, and northeastern Nigeria, 16 other countries slightly behind in that trajectory towards catastrophe. Famines are now back, said Mark Lowcock, the United Nations humanitarian chief. It will be a horrible stain on humanity for decades to come if we become the generation to oversee the return of such a terrible Scourge. Scourge. This is still avoidable. We have been privileged to live in a thrilling epoch in history in which child mortality has plunged, disease and famine retreated, literacy soared, and human well-being skyrocketed. At this time of year, I normally counter all my gloomy columns by writing that the previous year was the best in human history by such metrics as the share of children dying by the age of 5. By 2020 was not the best year in human history. It was an annus horribilis, and UNICEF warns that the result may be 10,000 additional children dying each month from hunger. The setback in developing countries has been exacerbated by passivity, paralysis, and indifference in the United States and Europe, and international organizations like World Bank. The biggest cause of global crisis is the coronavirus pandemic, but only indirectly. Outside of the rich world, the casualties are not octogenarians with the virus so much as children dying of hunger because of economic disruption, or middle-aged children dying of AIDS, adults dying of AIDS because they can't get medicines. The capital of human suffering today is arguably Yemen, which the United Nations called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. As we celebrate the new year, Yemeni children like Abdul are dying of hunger. Yemen's suffering is complicated. Always poor, the country has been shattered by a war and blocked by Saudi Arabia, with backing from the United States under both Obama and Trump administrations. Obama officials have acknowledged, not as candidly as they should, that this was a mistake. Misrule by the Houthi faction backed by Iran has compounded the suffering, as have both cholera and coronavirus, and donor countries are focused on their own problems and averting their eyes, so Abdu died. If you simply look at coronavirus numbers, you might think that poor countries have dodged a bullet. Developing countries have generally avoided high mortality of coronavirus, particularly in Africa. But that may be changing with the tide of new infections. And in any case, the indirect effects have been devastating, so that a pandemic of a coronavirus has been followed by a pandemic of hunger, disease, and illiteracy. Lockdowns meant that casual laborers and no income, and tuberculosis patients couldn't get medicine. Campaigns to battle malaria, polio, AIDS, and vitamin A deficiency were left in disarray. The repercussions are endless. The United Nations warns that poverty and disruptions from the pandemic may push 13 million additional girls into child marriages. Disrupted campaigns against female genital mutilations may result in 2 million more girls enduring genital cutting, the UN said, while reduced access to contraceptions may lead to 15 million unintended pregnancies. The World Bank said an additional 72 million children may be pushed into illiteracy. We are increasingly talking about a lost generation whose potential may be permanently quashed by this pandemic, said Angeline Momera of CampFed, which supports girls' education in sub-Saharan Africa. An expert panel crunched the number and estimated that under even a moderate scenario of what lies ahead, an additional 168,000 children will die from malnutrition because of the consequences of the coronavirus. Think about that. Abdo time 168,000. Many others will survive, but with lifelong intellectual impairments, or in some cases, permanent blindness caused by deprivation. In 2020 2021, this toll is worsened because of indifference in the rich world. The magnitude of the problem is an outrage, but it is even more outrageous that there are powerful, proven solutions that are not being delivered at scale, said Sean Baker, the chief nutritionist at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Some poor countries will be able to vaccinate at most one-fifth of their population in 2021, suggesting that the pandemic will continue to ping around the globe and smother poor countries. Partly that's because of United States and other rich countries, at the behest of the pharmaceutical company lobby, refuse to waive patent protections to allow poor countries access to cheaper vaccines. Gail Smith of One Campaign calls for three kinds of measures to help: greater efforts to distribute the vaccine globally, debt relief, and assistance from wealthy countries. The paradox is that 2020 may still be one of the 5 best years in human history by such measures as the share of children dying or the proportion of people dying in extreme poverty. If the world moves aggressively to address the crises, the year could be remembered as a blip, but the nightmare is a prolonged crisis in poor countries and a turning point on our watch that ends the march of progress for humanity. So Abdul Said was 4 years old, only 14 pounds, when his family took him to malnutrition ward in Yemen. And so this is really horrible to watch and read about. And it makes me really sad. I don't know what to say anymore. Nobody should die of hunger. Sometimes I think about how really I remember a quote from a sort of political theater I went to a long time ago, and it said half the world is vomiting, they have too much, and half the world is just starving. It's really difficult. So many people on diets, and so many people are dying of hunger. I mean, 168,000. It's ridiculous that anyone should die at all. wealth distribution again. Not even. So I'm really tired. So good night to everybody. And don't forget, think about others.